Hello, and welcome to How to Read the Bible. This is a 7-part intensive course presented by Zeteo School of Theology. And over the next week, we are together going to be exploring the book of the Bible and how to read it. Allow me to first briefly introduce myself. My name is Natalie Kendel. I am Director and Head Lecturer here at Zeteo School of Theology, and I will be presenting this course. My background includes a BA and MA certificate in theology with a focus on systematic theology. I am also pastor at the House, an online house church. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, please be aware that this course is meant to be taken after our covenant theology course. If you haven't taken covenant theology, we recommend that you take that course first before proceeding with this one. The content of this course builds on that one, and our courses are intended to be taken in a certain order in order to ensure that things make sense and that we're teaching this content in a conscientious, judicious, and effective way. You can go and watch our Covenant Theology course here on our YouTube channel for free, but for those who have taken Covenant Theology, let us move forward and introduce the course which now lies ahead of us. Here is the outline for this course's curriculum, an overview of what you can expect in the coming week. Today, we'll have an introduction to the Bible. It is intended to help us get the lay of the land, to understand what it is we're talking about when we say reading or studying the Bible. We will begin by identifying some of the challenges with interpreting the Bible. The central question we'll be asking is, why do we need interpretation? And what method of interpretation should we be choosing? Then tomorrow we'll jump in the deep end and explore the Bible as a historical document. How did the Bible come to us in the form we find it in today? What is the history of this book? Why are there so many versions, and which version is the best? Our third day will be all about exegesis, the exegetical method, what it is, why it matters, and how it works. Day number 4 will explore all about narrative, particularly the world of Hebrew narrative, the ancient culture of the Near East, and how the two are intrinsically connected. This will lead us into day 5, which will be all about genre and character within these narratives. Day 6, we will examine proof texting, what proof texting is, how it's historically been used, and the problems we face due to its practice. And finally, for our last class together, we'll look at some real tools and resources that you can go away, use and utilize as you continue to read and study the Bible for yourself. So, that's our overview for the coming week. These classes contain university-level curriculum. You'll basically be learning a semester's worth of a course in the matter of a week. The classes are designed specifically to be approachable even to those with no previous higher theological education. The classes are designed specifically to be approachable even to those with no previous higher theological education. So although taking covenant theology is a prerequisite to taking this class, you don't need to have a higher formal education in theology, religious studies, or the likes to get something from this class. In other general information, for this course, you will on a few occasions be invited to do some homework, so to speak. Nothing tedious or drawn out. On these occasions, it will be a text study where you'll be invited to practice the tools we learned earlier in class that day and apply them to a designated Bible passage. The goal of this is not perfection, and it's not graded, but rather to get us into the habit of comfortably practicing the tools that we're learning in this course. You will also find that there is a resources list, otherwise known as a reading list, attached to this course. And on there are links to books, articles, videos, and other resources that hopefully you'll find beneficial and useful during and beyond our time together. As this course progresses, we will be referencing some of the items on this list and explain how to use them. So without much further ado, let's dive into today's topic, an introduction to reading the Bible. To begin, as we said, we are going to be identifying some of the problems and challenges when reading the Bible. First off, we look at what we call the scholar versus layperson problem. Meet Malik. Malik has a passion for the Bible. Malik wants to be a pastor. And so he goes off and studies theology at university. For the next 5 years, Malik learns so much about scripture, church history, theology. He reads hundreds of books, is taught by brilliant professors, and studies things that blows his mind. And with all this new understanding and cutting-edge knowledge, he returns to his church, invigorated and inspired, ready to be a pastor, excited to share all that he's learned. Only he doesn't experience the receptiveness he'd imagined. Because the members back in his church have a way of doing things, a way of reading the Bible, the way their parents did, and their grandparents, and their great-grandparents before them. A way of reading certain biblical texts without all that fancy theological language. And they think the things Malik is sharing is academic drivel. Haughty, snobbish, worldly, modern, overcomplicated stuff that is irrelevant to everyday believers. Finally, one day during one of Malik's Bible studies, a member of his has had enough. He stands up and declares passionately, "You don't need to interpret the Bible. Just read it and do as it says." For hundreds of years, when it comes to reading the Bible, there has been a tension between the scholar and the layperson. Usually a remark like the one made by Malik's church member comes as a result of a protest against professional scholars, teachers, and pastors who appear like they're trying to seem fancy or are seemingly over-interpreting, making the Bible less accessible to the common man and woman. This remark is the layperson's way of saying the Bible is not an obscure book. Any person with half a brain can read and understand it. And when pastors and teachers dig around in it, it tends to muddy the water, and it makes what seemed clear unclear to us. On the one hand, there is sometimes a truth behind this protest. The Bible is intended to be accessible and understandable. It is also true that far too many teachers and preachers are led by ego instead of genuine spirit. They dig first and look later. In other words, they miss the plain meaning of the text by wanting to seem clever and superior. The academic world can be elitist and arrogant, completely losing sight of what they're doing it all for in the first place. I can certainly attest to this. While I was studying theology, there was a distinct trend of where some students and professors would value uniqueness over good interpretation, one-upping each other on spotting obscure details and clever twists in the text. But the aim of good interpretation is not uniqueness or originality. But, on the other hand, there are existing harmful views among many lay people. Firstly, this idea that the physical printed book of the Bible that lays in your nightstand has some sort of magical power in itself. that you can soak in spiritual juice from this object through a kind of osmosis, just by being around it or staring at its ink, clutching it to your chest. Secondly, that interpretation is either not necessary to exercise or to be aware of. That we can simply open up the Bible at any random text and fully discern its true meaning, coming away with a sound, responsible, informed understanding. History has time and time again proved that to not be the case. The layperson will often ask about the text, what does it mean? What does it mean for me today? And the scholar will focus on what the text meant. What did it mean? What was its meaning when it was written? Now, a responsible reader of the Bible includes both, asks what did it mean and what does it mean. If you only do the first, it leads to so much nonsense because it lacks any controls. The reading becomes fully subjective. And if you only do the latter, it leads to an out-of-touch mentality. Yes, it's very interesting that this text was written in a hut made of cow dung, but so what? So both sides of this conflict have made mistakes, and both sides have blind spots. Both sides run the risk of being driven by ego, ignorance, or both. So, how do we then join the forces of both sides? Well, we call this bridging the hermeneutical gap. What does that mean? Hermeneutics is a branch of knowledge, a discipline dealing with interpretation. So, in this class, when you hear the words hermeneutics or hermeneutical, we are referring to interpretation. A hermeneutic is a method of interpretation. The key to bridging the gap between the biblical scholar and the Bible reading layperson lies in bridging the hermeneutical, the interpretation, gap, meaning that a conversation needs to be had about interpretation, which leads us to the next challenge or question. Why do we need interpretation in the first place? Why do we need to interpret the Bible? It is estimated there are a staggering 45,000 church denominations globally and counting. Almost every single one of these 45,000 denominations claim the Bible as their book of authority. Almost every one of their belief statements will assert the Bible as being their inspiration, their guide, and where their beliefs stem from. So, how on earth can we have all these different contradicting, varying understandings of the same book? When all these people are reading the same book, how can there be so many contradicting conclusions about the same texts? The answer is what we talked about earlier: interpretation, hermeneutics, differing methods of interpretation. We interpret whether we're aware of it or not. This is something very important to be aware of. We apply interpretation whether we're aware of it or not, whether we try to or not. The 86-year-old layperson who spends 15 minutes reading her Bible before breakfast every morning applies just as much interpretation to the text she is reading as the PhD scholar who is an expert in biblical languages, has written 12 books, and has been carrying out an in-depth research for 4 decades. Interpretation is not an activity limited to academia, nor is it limited to reading the Bible. We interpret everything around us. Everything we perceive, everything our senses pick up, all the information we take in, our brain interprets it to try to make sense of it. And so all the information that our bodies, our minds receive go through a filter made up of elements as complex as we are as human beings, a filter made up of our worldview, our biases, our maturity, life experiences, our assumptions, upbringing, personality, our culture, politics, language, our expectations, what we think we already know, our education. Everything we receive goes through a filter. Or another way to put this, everything we see is seen through a lens. And that lens is colored by many things, thus affecting what we think we see. This quite glaringly highlights again the problem with saying, we don't need to interpret the Bible. Just read what it says. Anyone can understand its meaning, and then do as it instructs. Simple as that. Because 10 people in a room can come up with 11 different answers as to what one verse means. And the point here is just because you're not aware that you're interpreting, just because you're not aware of the method of interpretation you're applying, doesn't mean you're not interpreting the text. We interpret all information whether we want to or not. The answer to why do we need interpretation is, well, we already do it. So now the question becomes, are we doing it well? Are we doing it responsibly? Are we doing it mindfully? Are we doing it in an informed way? Is our method as trustworthy and sound as it can be? And that word method really is the key word here. Becoming a more responsible reader of the Bible entails 1. Acknowledging that you're interpreting, and 2. Critically looking at your interpretation methodology, your hermeneutics. Now, the truth is, unless we've already been through this process and learned about various major methodologies of studying the Bible, we likely won't really adhere to just one. We probably won't adhere fully to any. We will have adopted a sort of messy amalgamation, picking from here and there as it suits us, a style which we've inherited from perhaps our church culture, our parents, our clergy. Some groups are more aware of the method they're applying than others. For example, I grew up around a religious organization called the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or Adventists for short. And within Adventist tradition, there is a style of reading and interpreting the Bible. A professor once remarked at the college I attended, as much as Adventists differ from the conclusions the Roman Catholic Church comes to on many texts, the Catholics at least have a consistent method. One may not agree with that method or their conclusions, but they are consistent and remain true to their tradition. They have a more regularly clear and systematic methodology. The problem, of course, with an inconsistent method is the tendency toward applying or being the victim of manipulation. A lack of controls or discipline opens the door to twisting the text in whatever way suits the agenda of whoever's doing the twisting. An individual or a group can pull from here and there without logic, reason, any form of controls, making themselves an authority, saying, this is what the text means because it's what I want it to mean, because it serves my purpose somehow. I am grieved to say that many congregations function like this. The pastor, the visiting evangelist, certain individuals that win lay people's trust through power, charisma, or their title are set up as authorities on the Bible. They are made, or they make themselves, the lens through which we then read the text. And because there is so little to no awareness of hermeneutics, The congregation has little defense against this because there is no form of consistent hermeneutics. The text can be bent to mean anything someone wants it to. As long as they argue it well enough, or the groundwork of bias is already strong enough in the listeners to produce a favorable response to that specific perspective. Being aware of methodology and applying hermeneutics to our reading of the Bible is not just a game for scholars who want to seem clever. It is an ethical responsibility and a moral imperative for anyone who reads this book. Similar to the Hippocratic oath that new doctors take before practicing on patients, first do no harm. There is a need for those who read and teach the Bible to also go in with that mindset and commitment. To the best of your ability, do no harm. Wars have been waged because of the wrong methodology. History is packed full of people who have used this book to rationalize hatred, justify racism, slavery, misogyny, oppression, to prop up the rule of tyrants, to subjugate masses, to control, manipulate, and abuse well-meaning, vulnerable people who just genuinely believe in God and want to do His will. The transatlantic slave trade was rationalized by and to Christians. In 2018, Time magazine published an article called How Christian Slave Owners Use the Bible to Justify Slavery. You can read this article on your own time, the link you'll find in our resources list. How did Adolf Hitler manage to win the agreement and cooperation of millions of German Christians to support his anti-Semitic propaganda and take actively part in the murder of millions of Jews? Because he twisted this book, the Bible, and convinced them that it says the Jews are worthy of our hatred because they killed Jesus, because they are a lesser race. And if you're still unconvinced that interpretation and method matters, consider how many of the people of Israel who were deeply committed to studying the scriptures, knowing the text from beginning to end, who centered their identity as a people around the scriptures, and who spent hundreds of years looking for, longing for the coming of the Messiah, still missed it when he came. He did not look like what they had expected. He didn't adhere to their prejudices. Jesus did not match their interpretation of what the messianic prophecies said the Messiah would be like. They read the text and expected him to come a conquering, violent king, rallying the people as an army, overthrowing their Roman oppressors. Jesus did not fit into their hermeneutics. Jesus himself was rejected by many because of hermeneutics. And many of the religious leaders and most well-versed in the scriptures didn't recognize he was who he was. An ocean of injustices have been and are currently being rationalized and allowed to carry on, all in the name of God, all believed to be according to the teachings of this book. The point is, what we're talking about in this course is no small thing. It is incredibly important. During this course, we'll be looking more in depth at specific examples from history and in our present day of how misinterpretation leads to atrocities and suffering. But also conversely, how sound interpretation leads to liberation for all. Method matters. We must therefore be aware of our methodologies to begin taking an active part in learning and practicing informed hermeneutical choices. Otherwise, quite simply put, we do great harm, and we are likely to be defenseless against the harm of others who might wield this book as a weapon. So, the next logical question becomes, okay, so we need a methodology, but what methodology do we choose? Which one is the best? Because, as is demonstrated by the 45,000 Christian denominations, there are clearly quite a few out there. Well, during this course, we will be proposing a certain hermeneutical approach. We'll explain why this choice is informed and responsible, and how it affects the way we read the Bible. But of course, ultimately, it is up to each of us to decide. It's not for me or anyone else to dictate others' choices. The point here is to help us to make as informed a decision as possible. And I hope the case we make for our proposed method will resonate and reveal itself to be worthy of your consideration. The Bible has been called many things, repurposed for many things, and seen through many perspectives. Here are only a few. People have argued and approached the Bible as being a collection of moral code, a test of science, an ethical debate, a collection of myths and legends, a set of doctrine, a rabbi's teaching, a weapon of the government. And the list goes on and on. There are so many books out there about how to read the Bible, and frankly, many, if not most, are quite poor. As we said, our expectation colors the lens through which we read the Bible. For example, if you come at it as a lifestyle guide, you will read it very differently from if you're looking at it as a collection of ancient myths, similar to Greek mythology. In their book, The Drama of Scripture, authors Bartholomew and Goheen aptly write, "The language of the Bible is narrative, one overarching story, not a collection of creeds. If we ignore this, we will undoubtedly end up misunderstanding and misusing it." In this class, and indeed for all of our studies and courses we teach here at Zeteo, the first methodology we propose and apply is called biblical theology. You will already be familiar with this method as we introduced it in covenant theology, the course preceding this one. But just to refresh our memories, the method of biblical theology's brilliant rule is as follows. Why don't we let the Bible tell us the language we should read it in? So instead of us using our subjective methods of understanding and purely biased opinions, let's listen to what method the Bible is suggesting we should use. Because the Bible is using its own language to speak. It has already chosen the method for us, and this method is, as Bartholomew and Goheen identify, the language of narrative, the language of story. If the Bible has been written as a narrative, then shouldn't our reading method reflect that? This is why we propose the method of biblical theology. Biblical theology approaches the Bible as a narrative, one unified story with a beginning, with forward motion. It's all connected and it's all going somewhere. Biblical theology allows space for the Bible to dictate its own terms and decide how we're going to read it. It maintains, let the Bible speak for itself. So, this is the first hermeneutic we recommend and apply. The second overarching methodology which we propose, advocate for, and apply is the method of exegesis. We will be going into detail about what exegesis is and how to practice it in this course. Class on day 3 will be all about exegesis. But for now, Exegesis is a method of exposition and analysis of the text which centers around context. The context of the greater passage, the context of the book, the context of culture, history, time, the author, the original language. According to the Anchor Bible Dictionary, exegesis is the process of careful analytical study of biblical passages undertaken in order to produce useful interpretation of those passages. Ideally, exegesis involves the analysis of biblical text in the language of its original or earliest available form. So, here we have it, our suggested hermeneutical approaches. Number one, biblical theology, with the subcategory of covenant theology, which we've already studied, and secondly, exegesis. There are more subcategories here, but these are the two pillars we use. We will come back to again and again, using them as references, as controls to achieve a more responsible and informed and consistent understanding of the scriptures. I think by the end of this course, you'll get sick of hearing me use the word responsible. But if that word can stick in our minds as the central goal here, then it's worth repeating. So, earlier we identified one challenge when reading the Bible, the scholar versus layperson problem. And we're going to now identify a few more so that we understand what it is that we're dealing with. A second challenge is something we call the archaeological spade problem. There exists a persistent picture that the purest Bible research is someone who marches boldly forward with the Bible in one hand and a spade in the other. It's this idea that archaeology is the surest method of confirming the historical and factual accuracy of the Bible, that what we dig up in historical artifacts and ruins is a surefire way of confirming biblical events and divine revelation, even a way of bridging the gap between Christian faith and secular science, to really prove to those who doubted the Bible that the Israelites really did march through the Red Sea, and King David was a real historical person, and how this piece of crockery shows that Jesus really did pass through this town. You've probably seen some of these videos floating around Facebook or on YouTube, being shared eagerly by church members and evangelical media hubs. Chariots found in the Red Sea prove the Bible is true. This scientist discovers irrefutable proof that the Earth isn't older than 6,000 years. A buried village unearthed. Could it be the lost birthplace of King Saul? If you look at a teardrop under a microscope, the geometric patterns reveal that there must be intelligent design behind creation. Many Christians cling to stories like this, and they do it for several reasons. It gives them a foothold in debate against those who don't share the same beliefs as them. It makes them feel good because it seemingly confirms what they believe, even in so-called secular language. Following the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran between 1947 and 1956, an event we'll come back to later in this course, it spurred on in the coming years a near frenzy in some sections of Western Christian scholars. What else might we find that proves the whole Bible to be true? It really roused the passion for archaeological digging for biblical historical proof. But if we continue to use things like archaeology as one of the main foundational pillars to affirm and prop up what we believe, what the Bible says, what God is revealing to us, we will find this to be an unreliable, somewhat shaky foundation indeed. Information changes. Discoveries are subject to interpretation just like everything else. As much as historians may hate this, most of history is lost to us, in the sense that there are whole events and civilizations that have left no signs behind, no pieces of crockery to piece together. And so you may think that you're finally winning an argument against your atheist friend by sending a link to an article about how archaeologists found the lost throne of Hezekiah, and therefore the Bible must be true. You're not winning the argument you think you are. Archaeology has certainly confirmed the historical accuracy of numerous biblical events. Archaeology is not unimportant. That's not what we're saying here. But what we're discussing right now is reading the Bible. How to read it in the best, most informed way to understand its meaning as best as we can. The science of archaeology is not flawless. And to believe that having a spade in the other hand will guarantee sound biblical understanding is simply misplaced. We are in no way to write off science or historical research, but the spade method is not a reliable methodology to depend our study of the Bible on. A third challenge when approaching the Bible is the language problem. My husband is a pastor, Bible teacher, and researcher. During the introduction to a Bible study he was having with a church member, he happened to mention that the Bible wasn't written in English. And this statement stopped the member in their tracks because, whether they were unaware or simply had never thought about it before, the idea of the Bible not being originally in English was a surprising thought to them. I think that for many of us, we understand that the Bible wasn't originally written in English, but sometimes we can lose sight of that fact anyway, and lose sight of that fact's implications. To anyone who has done translation work, who knows more than one language, they know that translation is not always as straightforward as simply converting this word to that word, and this word to that word. Language is complex. Language contains nuance, intricate layers. One language can have a word that is not translatable into another language, not without its meaning being diminished or even lost. One of the last and hardest things people who are learning a new language grasp are things like idioms and humor, because idioms are metaphorical or abstract. Humor has subtleties that play on the fabric of culture, shared experiences of a group, insinuation. It is nuanced and complicated. People who are bilingual or multilingual will know this. Lost in translation isn't just a phrase about a person being lost in the transfer of languages, but of meaning being lost. Language is not just colored by culture, it is steeped in it. Culture and language are intertwined in a symbiotic relationship, one feeding off the other, each moving and changing the other. And so the language problem is also the culture problem. We do not inhabit the same culture as Abraham did, or Ezekiel, or Stephen. There is a cultural barrier as well, which must be acknowledged and studied too. We will delve deeper into language when it comes to reading the Bible later on, but for now we are simply identifying this as one of our challenges. Now, though there are many more challenges which exist, the fourth and final one we'll mention today is the pastor problem. We alluded to this earlier in the scholar versus layperson issue. It's this phenomena where a religious leader or authority figure, such as a pastor, is placed on a pedestal and looked to by others, for example, church members or lay people, to be the final authority on what the Bible says, to have the final say. The pastor is viewed as a person who holds all the secrets to unlocking the meaning of the text and doesn't really seem to share any of the keys which would allow others to access them as well. This role is not always held by a pastor, but you can substitute it with evangelist, professor, or general conference president. The idea behind the pastor problem is almost that certain people are seen as magical. They have certain mysterious powers that give them the right to dictate what true interpretation is because they're viewed as anointed or chosen or have a certain title. And the Bible then becomes filtered through this person and their position of authority. The pastor said it, so it must be true. The General Conference president said it, so it must be true. I'm very sad to say that many people in positions of influence and authority in religious circles relish this power, seek after this power, encourage this idolizing by their followers. I'm the pastor, trust me. I'm the conference president, agree with me. They encourage an environment which keeps intact that pedestal they've been put on and enjoy the untouchable position they have, how their word goes unquestioned. This is nothing but a game of pride and ego, simply put. A pastor that wants his members to be completely dependent on him is not a good pastor. He is a walking ego, looking to control and be unimpeachably admired and revered. In contrast, the goal of any good leader is not to amass and protect their own power. It is to empower other people. We talked about this in our Edenic covenant class, how from the beginning of the earth, God models and creates human beings to empower each other, not to hold on to power, but to give it away. Thus it should be with good leaders, to empower others with tools and skills so they are able to carry on themselves when you're not around, not dictating to others what to think, but teaching them to think. If I may apply a quote from Star Wars here, when talking about how teachers should think about their role, a character says, "We are what they grow beyond." That is the burden of all masters. Meaning, the point of teaching is not to keep the student below you or having to keep depending on you so as to feed your ego and power. The point is that you give them tools in the hope that they will surpass you, develop beyond you, not to artificially manufacture a situation where others need you to make you feel special and needed. Some of you who have joined us for this course are also familiar with The House, an online house church that I pastor at. At the house, we share Bible stories, and sometimes I'll receive very kind and well-intended comments such as, "Nobody tells these stories like you do," or "Thank you for revealing scripture to us again." But it's very important, and it's important to me personally, that I make clear there isn't some secret magical formula that only I and I alone am privy to, and so everyone else needs to be dependent on me to read and understand these stories in the same way. To claim this would be false and injurious. If you've enjoyed stories at the house, that is wonderful, but I'd like to be clear. The study and research that goes into these stories is based precisely on the methodologies we will be learning about in this course. The point of this course is to teach those methodologies so anyone who wishes to can apply them as well. At the end of this course, we should all be able to apply those same tools when studying the text for ourselves. It is not a mystery, it is not a hidden art, it is and should always be available to anyone who wishes to learn. And in the same way, I hope that you will become the sort of teacher or influencer who is not power hungry, but focuses on empowering others. Responsible and informed hermeneutics does not merely belong to the academic world or a few individuals in positions of power. Nobody should have to spend thousands of pounds and attend years at a university to have access to these skills. If we allow this wall to exist between academic theology and lay people, we are saying there is a price to accessing responsible Bible reading. The wall then becomes made up of time and money. And with that, you can also add class, geography, and many other privileges. You need to have enough money to earn a degree, if not two, and you need to be available time-wise to attend university. Well, that automatically disqualifies people who have to work full-time caregivers and parents, those who don't have thousands of pounds lying around, some of those with learning difficulties, those in debt, those who are poor, those who simply have other life plans and things going on. If you see, this becomes a dangerous precedent to set, to accept this paywall, where access is determined by wealth or the privilege of availability. And that wall is something that we'd like to work at combating. That sums up the aim of this course and indeed the goal of Zeteo School, to make the tools and skills needed to read the Bible in a more responsible and informed way available to anyone who wants to learn. The skills offered and taught to theology students at university. The other goal is to buck against the trend of being spoon-fed by religious influential characters, and instead taking steps towards developing personal competency and empowerment. We will endeavor to give clear tools you can take away and use. We will demonstrate and teach how sound hermeneutical approaches that you can consider and, if you choose, apply. Although this is a foundational course, it will lay the base for which future Bible study can be securely built on. The curriculum will serve as a good baseline that you can come back to again and again and again. We will identify habits we need to unlearn when we're reading the Bible and offer better tools to equip yourself with. So, we can keep in mind these challenges that we've talked about as we move through this week. And that concludes our introduction to our course, How to Read the Bible. In tomorrow's class, we will really start getting into things. We will explore the history of the Bible. How did we come to have this document? Where does it come from? And how has it taken its current form? All that and more coming up tomorrow. See you then.